get home.
Now you mentioned the record pool, though. Now, when did the record pool start to become? I want to just backtrack for 1 second because you talked about going to New York for imports, but then a bunch of you used to go out to the record labels here, where they had offices in, was it Waltham? Where was it? Peabody, one of those.
One of those Worcester area, something around.
All the labels had offices.
Right.
And you guys would go down there and ask for records from them.
Beg for records, 45s, and you get good things and bad things.
Yeah.
And they hated us coming in,
right.
you know. And finally, it was, I believe, Judy Weinstein in New York City that started for the record. And she was so poor and dedicated. She slept on a lounge chair in this rented space. You know, and that was her bed, and, you know, all the DJs got together and they went to all the record companies and said, send us the records and we'll distribute them, you know, so you don't have any headache, you know. So they started sending boxes of records, and, you know, again, the record companies were overwhelmed that this music was selling big time, and they didn't know how and why. It was like, you know, bringing in all this money, you know, like Love's Theme, I don't think they ever promoted, and it was #1 on the Billboard chart. And all this cash money coming in, you know, and that was before I think Casablanca even started as a label. Once that labels took off, I mean, it was just all disco, 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 and that's when it kind of swept into the straight culture. Mm-hmm. And it went on the radio, and that's really how it died. And they had that big blow-up thing in 1979 in Chicago.
Yeah.
Blow up all the records, disco is dead, disco sucks, the whole thing. But it never did in the gay bars. It never died. It died in the straight bars, or got a bad rap.
Right.
But in the gay bars, it flourished.
Well, but a couple of things started happening around then, right? I mean, so Disco Sucks, the labels stopped producing quite as much, though, because they don't want to get stuck with records that aren't selling, and the taint is sort of like, it spreads to the record labels, right? Right. Now, this is when imports start to become even more important, right? Because the only disco being made at a certain point
was in Italy and England.
It's still being made in Europe.
And right. And see, disco never died over there. I was just reading a book, the Legends of Vinyl, the Legends of Disco.
Yeah.
And that's what they said, that, you know, when they started these pools, you know, and going out and getting the music that we liked to dance to that wasn't being served here, because it didn't die in England. In fact, it flourished over in Europe, and it still is big. And you know, but we would get the record pools stuff, but we used to call it promo demo shit. Mm-hmm. You know, because a lot of it was that's exactly what it was, a filler music. You know, but if you really wanted to, you know, have the music, you had to go out and spend, you know, and buy the imports in New York or wherever they were, you know.
And I want to circle back to this a little later, because I want to talk about Carol's store when it opens. But Carol, at this point in the early 79, 80, she's not really on the scene at all yet, right? She's not DJing at the 12 yet?
I don't know where or if she was DJing at that particular time, but she was an officer of the Boston Record Pool.
Oh, she was?
Yeah. See, so that's
I'm
why.
not sure if I ever knew that.
Yeah, and George Borden was the president, you know, but he thought he was going to be the next Dick Clark, you know. Yeah. And Carol was the secretary, so when you come in, she'd be the one there, you know. And of course, I went in there in 79 now. I was working 2 jobs, 8 shifts a week, flying back and forth from P-Town with Conrad. And, you know, I went in there, and Conrad, of course, was a member of the pool for a long time. See, it was a catch-22 thing, you know, you couldn't get in there unless you had a job, and you couldn't get a job unless you were in the pool.
Unless you had access to the
records. You know, because you had to have the records. So, you know, we used to go to the secondhand record stores, and they used to be on the mailing list for the promos. And we'd go there like 2 or 3 times a week, and, you know, they would have the promos right out first thing to sell, and they'd sell them for $2.99, $1.99, $3.49. And we pick them up, you know, and we look at the back of the covers and say, oh, well, he played on this cover, this record. They were instrumentals on this. Okay, and you would just know from what was on the label, the people that were there, whether to take a chance to buy it. There was no listening stations even then, you know. Mm-hmm. So, you know, and you get it home, and you might have $1 million smash like Born to Be Alive or something like that, or you might have something that was just a real waste of money, you know. So it was just a lucky draw of the cards, you know.
Talk about Born to Be Alive for a second, because I know that Dana ended up getting credit for the remix and all, right? But now the record originally started as a Mexican, right? He was a Mexican singer, right?
I believe he was from France.
Oh, okay.
Okay, because the first imports came. Now, see, Philip, my partner, also had a job at Strawberries downstairs where they sold the 45s.
Right.
And then when they released the 12 inches in '76, and more started coming in. All right, he had the singles and the 12 inches, and they got a little import section with Jerry Warren, and Jerry Warren was the boss. Philip worked under him. But, you know, they were all there. Now, 3 copies of Born to Be Alive came in, and I believe the import was from France.
No, I guess I'm not saying because Patrick Hernandez obviously is a Hispanic name, but
right.
I feel like there's a Mexican connection somewhere, and I don't know what that is. But
no, I don't think so. I don't think so.
So it comes from France, but now it doesn't have a remix yet.
No, it was the beer thing, but it was still to die for.
Yeah,
you know. But I mean, you had to be clever to get it in there and present it at the right time. But I mean, it went over like gangbusters, and nobody knew what the hell this was. This was something from France, you know. And there was, like I said, 3 copies, and Philip brought 2 copies home, one for me and one for him. Why not? I mean, that's part of working at a record store, you know, having the advantage. And Dan and I just happened to come in shopping. See, this was always, Dan and I always was ahead, you know, and kept buying, you know, that's how he kept his thing going, and he was quiet about it, you know. And there was one more copy, and Philip said, you know, you better have this. And, you know, of course, he took it home, and the rest is history. He just fell in love and had a very traumatic experience remixing it down at Sigma Sound, but he still got to do it, and, you know,
traumatic.
He was never happy with it. The beginning has
the intro's a little swirly.
Yeah, it is. It's like kind of like you have to push it.
It slips around a little. Yeah.
And he kept saying to them, you know, it's not on, it's not on. And of course, you know, studio time is expensive, especially Sigma Sound Studios, for remixing a record. You know, so but you know, he kept insisting, and then finally they just, oh well, we just can't do it anymore. There's not enough money. It has to go out like it went out, and it did, and that blemish is there forever.
It didn't stop it from being a massive hit, though.
Massive. And I mean, then it finally got to be, you know, we were playing, and it was called, you know, Born to Die, or Born to Kill Day Night, you know, whatever, because it was a twice-a-night record.
Yeah.
You know, you played it when you went in for the happy hour crowd, and then you played it again at 1:30 or whatever, you know. And 79 was the greatest year, I think.
Val says the same thing.
For disco music and records. It was just right. Everything was a classic. Bound to Cure, The Boss, Good Times, on and on. Relight My Fire came out the year after. But, I mean, the music that we had was just super duper, you know, really good. And it wasn't machines, it was really instruments and, you know, and great writing. And, you know, that's why it got so hot in the, I mean, you just couldn't deny it. It was a force that everybody had. And when you had a party, you know, it was the only music to turn on to get everybody, you know, off and whatever, instead of people just sitting around going, oh yeah, and talking about their lives, you know. You could really, you know, go with that. And so, you know, there was a lot of private parties too and stuff like that. In fact, that's what we used to do on Friday and Saturday nights. We'd have a private party, and we'd send runners out on Rutland Square, and we'd send people out and tell everybody, tell the DJs this and that. And, you know, a bunch of people would assemble at our house at 2:05, 2:15, because there was nothing to do, nowhere to go, you know. And we'd have the lights all go in, and the records, everything. We had a wall with all the record album covers.
So a lot of these parties happened at your place.
Yeah.
Because there was also another place, I want to say that Dana or somebody mentioned that there was an after-hours thing very often in Brighton or somewhere, Brookline. That would be an after-hours thing, and a lot of DJs would go to that as well, and it was kind of a very private sort of thing, too. But
well, I don't remember, so it might have been that private that I didn't go there, you know. But, like I said, that's how we did it, you know. We had parties, and, you know, and that's how we, you know, and it came to be what it came to be. But, you know, there was just that day where somebody, somewhere, thought of, you know, well, we can't get live acts because bands won't play in the gay bars. At that time, 74, 3, they didn't want to be associated with gay bar, you know, playing there, you know. So we didn't have any live entertainment, but somebody clever thought of, you know, putting the 2 turntables together and letting it keep going, whether it was Tom Moulton or I don't know who. Tom Moulton used to mix tapes, and he would remix and extend all the Sound of Philadelphia and all the really good choice records of the day. But they were on tapes, and I think they were not mixed, because I know Robbie Leslie told me he was working there as a cocktail waiter, and he would, you know, hear these fabulous tapes that Tom Moulton did for Fire Island, you know. And that was like the testing ground, just before disco became a word. You know, they would test out the records on Fire Island in the summertime with the whole gay crowd there, you know, because the most esoteric queens were there, you know, and you know, you could tell right off the bat if a song went over or not, and the record company would watch this very closely, and that would, you know, be the deciding factor of whether they were going to release it in New York to the rest of the people, you know. And of course, Henry Stone down in TK, he just died recently. He was a very clever, wise guy, very humble beginnings, having a small place in Hialeah, Florida. And, you know, that was like this, with the common people lived in Miami, you know. And he, of course, Casey Finch from Casey and the Sunshine Band, very clever keyboardist, and he knew how to, you know, and, you know, they just conglomerated and mixed many songs and many different group headings, whatever, and bring in singers and musicians. And these people were, you know, studio musicians, you know, they weren't just like a, you know, I mean, they played on everybody's records, you know, and they only did it all. The most of them were done in 1 or 2 takes. Like Donna Summer, she would only do 2 takes or 3, and she said, "You got it, you know, it's in there, whatever, you know, I'm not doing it again." Yeah. And you know, but I mean, she knew her shit, you know, and we loved Donna. Gloria Gaynor was the first queen, yeah, but then turned into Donna.
I want to revisit Donna.